Hey guys, tonight we begin with something we all think we understand. A cold winter. We complain about the heating bill, dig out our thickest sweaters, maybe even grumble about shoveling the driveway. But what truly makes a winter brutal? Is it just a really low number on the thermometer? A blizzard that shuts down the highway for a day? Or is there something far more insidious, more relentless, a kind of multi-pronged assault on human endurance that goes far beyond a simple dip in temperature? Let's be clear. When we talk about history's most brutal winters, we're not just talking about a chilly snap that makes you pull on an extra pair of socks. We're talking about an elemental force, a sustained period of environmental hostility that reshapes landscapes, breaks economies, triggers famines, and tests the very limits of human and animal survival. It's an apocalyptic symphony played on ice and wind and temperature, while obviously a key player is just one instrument in this terrifying orchestra. Of course, extreme cold is at the heart of any truly brutal winter. We're talking about temperatures that don't just make you uncomfortable, but actively kill. Frostbite, hypothermia, the slow, insidious draining of body heat that, left unchecked, leads to organ failure and death. When temperatures plunge far below freezing, water pipes burst, engine seize, and exposed skin can suffer severe damage in minutes. Imagine air so cold it burns your nostrils with every breath, where the moisture in your lungs feels like it's turned to tiny ice crystals, and simply stepping outside feels like walking into a meat locker that's also trying to steal your soul. That kind of cold transforms everyday tasks, fetching water, gathering firewood, even just existing, into a desperate struggle for survival. For historical populations, without central heating, insulated homes, or even reliable warm clothing, any prolonged period below zero was a direct threat to life. Your home, if you were a medieval peasant, was basically a drafty mud oven, and the temperature inside was usually only a polite few degrees above whatever the weather was doing outside. So yes, bone-chilling cold is a foundation, but it's just the opening act. What truly elevates a cold spell into a brutal winter is its duration. A single day or even a week of extreme cold is a challenge. A month is devastating. Multiple months or even years turn a harsh season into a historical catastrophe. Imagine a winter where the ground never thaws, where the rivers remain frozen solid for so long that trade routes are cut off, where the snow piled against your door melts slightly during a fleeting moment of sunshine only to refreeze into an impenetrable wall of ice by night. This relentless grind exhausts resources, breaks morale, and pushes societies to the brink. Food supplies dwindle. Fuel reserves are depleted, and the constant struggle against the cold wears down even the strongest among us. For societies dependent on seasonal agriculture, a prolonged freeze could mean not only the loss of the current harvest, but the ruin of the next planting season as well, leading directly to famine. A winter that outstays its welcome doesn't just bite, it starves, it sickens, it slowly squeezes the life out of everything. Beyond mere temperature, the volume and nature of snowfall play a critical role in defining a brutal winter. We're not talking about a picturesque dusting, but a white blanket of doom. Heavy, sustained snowfall can completely bury homes, collapse roofs, and render entire regions impassable. Roads vanish, mountain passes become death traps, and communication grinds to a halt. Imagine waking up to find your doorway completely blocked, your world reduced to a tiny, freezing enclosure. This isn't just an inconvenience. It's isolation. Emergency services, even in modern times, can be overwhelmed. Historically, it meant entire villages cut off from the outside world, left to fend for themselves with whatever meager resources they had stockpiled. Blizzards, with their combination of heavy snow and high winds, reduce visibility to zero, creating whiteout conditions that make it impossible to navigate even familiar terrain. People get lost mere feet from their homes, freezing to death before they can find shelter. Livestock trapped outdoors can be buried alive. The sheer physical effort required to clear snow, especially with primitive tools, is immense, further draining precious energy and resources from already struggling communities. Snow is beautiful, yes, but in its brutal form, it is a suffocating, isolating force. And then there's ice, often overlooked in favor of snow. Ice, particularly in the form of freezing rain or massive ice storms, is a silent, insidious destroyer. Freezing rain coats every surface in a brittle, treacherous layer, turning roads, sidewalks, and even exposed skin into a deadly trap. Trees, heavy with the weight of ice, snap and fall, bringing down power lines and further isolating communities. Power outages in extreme cold are not just annoying, they are life-threatening. Without electricity, heating systems fail, water pipes freeze, and communication goes dark. Imagine being trapped in your home in sub-zero temperatures, with no power, no heat, and every surface outside coated in a razor-sharp glaze. Black ice, nearly invisible, makes even short trips a perilous gamble, leading to accidents and injuries that overwhelm already strained medical resources. Ice also has a way of working its way into structural weaknesses, causing buildings to crack and collapse under the immense pressure. It's not just a surface threat. It's a structural one, systematically dismantling the very infrastructure that protects and connects people. Finally, the wind chill factor. This is the invisible side of winter, multiplying the effect of cold dramatically. Wind doesn't just make it feel colder. It actively accelerates heat loss from exposed skin, increasing the risk of frostbite and hypothermia exponentially. A calm 10-degree Fahrenheit day might be tolerable, but at a 20-mile-per-hour wind, and it feels like temperature can plunge below zero, turning tolerable cold into actively dangerous conditions. For anyone caught outdoors or even within a drafty dwelling, wind chill is a constant, biting reminder of winter's power. It penetrates layers of clothing, finds every gap in insulation, and relentlessly steals precious body heat. This is especially true for those whose work or survival demands that they be outside. Farmers, soldiers, messengers. A brutal winter rarely comes without this piercing wind, adding another layer of physical and psychological torment to the already grim conditions. But the true definition of a brutal winter extends beyond just these atmospheric elements. It lies in their interconnected consequences, particularly for human societies. Resource depletion and famine * a prolonged, intensely cold winter, especially one with heavy snow and ice, can cripple agriculture. Crops are lost, livestock freeze to death, and already scarce food supplies dwindle rapidly. Historically, without modern transportation and global supply chains, communities were entirely dependent on local harvests and store provisions. A single brutal winter could exhaust these reserves, leading directly to widespread famine. People starved not just from lack of food, but from the inability to reach what little food might exist elsewhere. Disease and public health crisis * cold, hunger, and cramped living conditions create a breeding ground for disease. Weakened immune systems, poor hygiene, bathing becomes impossible or dangerous, and respiratory illnesses like pneumonia and bronchitis run rampant. Epidemics often follow brutal winters, wiping out populations already decimated by starvation and exposure. Imagine the medieval peasant, huddled with family and livestock in a smoky, unventilated hut, coughing and shivering as illness spreads to the vulnerable community with terrifying speed. Isolation and communication breakdown * when roads are buried, rivers frozen, and power lines down, communities become isolated islands. Trade stops, news doesn't travel, and assistance cannot reach those in need. For individuals, this means no medical help, no resupply, and no escape. For governments, it means a loss of control and an inability to assess or respond to the crisis effectively. The psychological toll of this forced isolation, especially combined with endless darkness and cold, can be immense. Economic paralysis * the economic impact of a brutal winter is catastrophic. Trade routes freeze, markets close, and production grinds to a halt. In agrarian societies, the loss of crops and livestock could mean economic ruin for generations. Recovery is slow, requiring immense resources and labor, further straining an already weakened population. This economic paralysis often contributed to social unrest and political instability. Psychological toll * beyond the physical hardship. The prolonged cold, darkness, and constant struggle take a heavy psychological toll. Seasonal affective disorder is a modern term, but the despair, lethargy, and mental exhaustion of endless winter days without respite are ancient. The constant threat of death, the sight of suffering, and the sheer relentlessness of the conditions can break even the strongest spirits, leading to widespread hopelessness and desperation. In essence, a truly brutal winter is not merely a weather event. It is a multifaceted assault on every aspect of human existence. It's when extreme temperatures combine with suffocating snow, treacherous ice, and piercing winds, all sustained for so long that they systematically dismantle the very infrastructure of survival. It's when the environment turns actively hostile, pushing humanity to its absolute limits, revealing both our fragility and, as we'll soon see, our incredible capacity for resilience. Okay, so we've talked about what a brutal winter is. Not just about the temperature, but about the whole world conspiring against you. But what if I told you that for hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors didn't just deal with brutal winters. They lived in a world defined by them. A world where the chill wasn't just a season, but the very atmospheric wallpaper of existence. Tonight, we're diving back into deep history's chill, the ice ages. Forget your cozy fireplace and your puffy coats for a moment. Imagine a planet where colossal sheets of ice, miles thick, stretched across continents, where temperatures plunged so low for so long that entire landscapes were scoured, reshaped, and frozen solid. This wasn't just a bad winter. This was a planetary phenomenon, a slow motion, millennia-long deep freeze that truly tested the limits of primordial survival. When we talk about ice ages, most people picture woolly mammoths and glaciers, and they're not wrong. But it's more complex than that. The Earth has actually gone through multiple ice ages throughout its 4.5 billion year history. Tonight, we're focusing on the most recent and arguably most impactful series of glacial periods known as the Quaternary Glaciation, which kicked off about 2.6 million years ago and included the Pleistocene epoch. This wasn't one continuous deep freeze, but rather a cycle of intense cold periods, glacial periods, interspersed with relatively warmer interglacial periods like the one we're in now. During these glacial maxima, ice covered up to 30% of the Earth's landmass, transforming lush forests into vast, treeless tundras and frigid steppes. Now, picture our earliest human ancestors, the hominids. These weren't the modern humans you see in history documentaries, building pyramids and debating philosophy. These were hardy, resourceful beings, slowly evolving, often without spoken language as we know it, just trying to make it to the next sunrise. And they were facing an environmental challenge unlike anything we can scarcely imagine, most likely originating from the warmer climes of Africa. They eventually began to push northward, directly into the jaws of this relentless, planet-wide winter. How did they possibly survive? It truly is a testament to human ingenuity, the first and perhaps most monumental technological leap that literally saved humanity's hide during the ice ages was a control of fire. For millions of years, hominids likely encountered natural fires, but truly controlling it, generating on demand, keeping it alive, and using it purposefully, that was a game changer. Fire didn't just offer warmth. It offered light against the endless dark nights, psychological comfort, and, crucially, a way to cook food. Cooking made otherwise indigestible plants edible and tough meat easier to chew and absorb nutrients from, providing a vital energy boost in a calorie-scarce world. But fire was more than just a heater and a kitchen appliance. It was a tool. Hardening spear tips in a flame made them more effective for hunting. It offered protection against large, dangerous Ice Age predators like saber-toothed cats and cave bears, who were probably just as interested in human calories as humans were in theirs. And socially, the campfire became the heart of the early human community, a gathering place where stories were shared, even if just through gestures. Bonds were forged and knowledge was passed down. It was a primordial hearth, the first living room, a beacon of defiance against the overwhelming cold. Beyond fire, early humans had mastered the art of shelter. While natural caves provided crucial refuge from the elements and predators, they weren't always available or perfectly suited. Our ancestors learned to modify these natural shelters, perhaps adding windbreaks at the entrance or digging out sleeping hollows. As they ventured into treeless plains, they constructed rudimentary structures from whatever was at hand: mammoth bones, animal hides, and packed earth. These simple dwellings, while far from cozy, offer a vital barrier against the biting winds and relentless snow, providing just enough insulation to make survival possible. Imagine the smell inside these bone and hide huts, heated by an open fire, packed with sweaty, smoky humans and their furry companions. Not glamorous, but life-saving. And speaking of furry companions, let's talk about clothing. The ability to craft warm, durable clothing from the hides and furs of hunted animals was another critical adaptation. This wasn't just throwing a bare skin over your shoulders. It involved sophisticated techniques. Scraping hides clean, tanning them, likely with brains or urine, less glamorous, very effective, cutting them into patterns, and sewing them together with bone needles and sinew thread. Layered clothing, tailored to fit, would have been essential for retaining body heat, allowing hominids to not only survive, but even thrive in temperatures that would kill an unprotected modern human in minutes. This second skin was a crucial buffer against the cold that permeated every aspect of their world. Hunting was not a sport. It was an absolute necessity. The Ice Age landscape, dominated by tundra and steppe, offered limited plant-based foods for much of the year. Survival depended on hunting the megafauna that roamed these vast plains: woolly mammoths, reindeer, bison, and woolly rhinos. This required immense courage, sophisticated tracking skills, and, crucially, cooperation. Group hunting strategies allowed them to take down enormous animals that could provide not only meat for food, but also fat, a vital calorie source in the cold, hides for clothing and shelter, bones for tools, and even dung for fuel. Every part of the animal was a treasure. The diet of Ice Age humans, particularly those in the northern latitudes, would have been incredibly high in animal fat and protein. While we often celebrate fruits and vegetables today, for primordial survival in the cold, fat was king. It provided the concentrated energy needed to maintain body temperature and fuel a highly active, physically demanding lifestyle. Imagine chewing on raw, frozen mammoth fat, not appetizing to us, but pure survival fuel for them. This reliance on large game also pushed the development of more advanced hunting tools, from expertly crafted spear points to atlatls, spear throwers, that increased range and power. The constant, overwhelming challenge of the cold also profoundly shaped early human social structures. Survival was not a solo endeavor. It demanded cooperation on an unprecedented scale. Living in larger, more cohesive groups offered numerous advantages: shared warmth, collective hunting efforts, mutual protection against predators and rival groups, and the sharing of valuable knowledge about resources, tool-making, and survival techniques. Communal living in caves or shelters wasn't just efficient. It was a matter of life and death, with shared body heat contributing significantly to individual survival. This intense social cohesion likely laid the groundwork for complex human societies. The Ice Ages also dictated human migration patterns, often in unexpected ways. While vast ice sheets were formidable barriers, they also locked up enormous amounts of water, causing global sea levels to drop by hundreds of feet. This exposed land bridges that are now submerged beneath the oceans, creating new pathways for dispersal. The most famous example is Beringia, a land bridge that connected Asia and North America, allowing early humans to migrate into the Americas. These migrations were epic journeys, not quick trips, requiring incredible resilience, adaptability, and the ability to navigate entirely new, challenging landscapes for generations. The world our ancestors lived in was also populated by an astonishing array of megafauna. Giant animals adapted to the cold. Beyond the famous woolly mammoths and rhinos, there were giant ground sloths, enormous cave bears, massive Irish elk with colossal antlers, and formidable predators like the saber-toothed cat. These creatures were both a source of sustenance and an existential threat. They adapted through thick fur, layers of fat, and specialized diets. But as the climate eventually warmed and human hunting pressure increased, many of these magnificent beasts ultimately faced extinction. Eventually, after cycles spanning hundreds of thousands of years, the last great glacial period began its slow retreat. This thawing process wasn't sudden. It took thousands of years for colossal ice sheets to melt, fundamentally reshaping the Earth's geography. Sea levels rose, land bridges disappeared, and new landscapes emerged from beneath the ice, creating new environments and challenges for the human populations who had learned to master the deep chill. This period, the beginning of the Holocene epoch, our current interglacial, brought warmer, wetter conditions, allowing for the eventual development of agriculture and settled civilizations. But even with the end of the full-blown Ice Age, the memory and the lessons of extreme cold were etched into human experience. The warming wasn't a uniform, gentle embrace. There were still periods of intense, localized cold snaps, mini ice ages, and exceptionally brutal winters. The ingenuity, the communal spirit, the hard-earned knowledge of surviving extreme cold forged in these primordial eras would continue to serve humanity for millennia. From developing specialized shelters to devising innovative clothing, the fight against the cold taught our ancestors profound lessons in adaptation. And as we'll see next, even as civilizations rose, brutal winters continued to shape human history, forcing ancient societies to continually adapt and struggle against the frost. All right, you've survived the definition of brutal winter, and you've even dipped your toes into the primordial chill of the ice ages. But what happens when humanity gets a little more civilized? What happens when we stop being scattered hunter-gatherer bands and start building cities, farming fields, and generally try to make a life that isn't just about surviving the next saber-toothed tiger? Well, the answer is winter still tried to kill us, and honestly, it often succeeded. Imagine trying to keep warm in a world without central heating, without insulated walls, without even a decent pair of gloves. These ancient civilizations, the very bedrock of our history, faced winters that would make most modern people curl up and cry for their electric blankets. They battled the frost with grit, ingenuity, and a hefty dose of sheer desperation. When our ancestors shifted from nomadic hunting and gathering to settled agriculture, life became different. Suddenly, you weren't just following the herds. You were tied to a piece of land. And that land, come winter, could become a frozen death trap. The big challenge? Food. If your crops failed due to an early frost or a brutal cold snap, you starved. Period. So, early farmers became master food storers. They dug pits, built rudimentary granaries, and learned to dry and salt everything they could get their hands on. Grains with a backbone, wheat, barley, millet, all carefully harvested, threshed, and tucked away for the lean months. Think of it as humanity's first emergency food supply, except the emergency happened every single year. Shelter also saw upgrades. Instead of temporary hides and flimsy lean-tos, they started building more permanent structures. Mud brick homes in warmer climates or wattle and daub huts. Think sticks woven together and plastered with mud and dung in more temperate zones. These weren't exactly five-star accommodations. They were drafty, damp, and smelled faintly of whatever animal decided to share the wall. But they offered a fixed roof and a measure of protection from the wind and snow. And speaking of animals, if you think your modern pet hog's a bed, you should have seen ancient households. Livestock weren't just food. They were living, breathing radiators. Cows, goats, pigs, chickens, they all shared living spaces with humans, especially during the coldest nights. The smells? Legendary. The warmth? Absolutely vital. A cow in the corner of your hut could literally mean the difference between life and death for a family. It was communal warmth, whether you wanted it or not. Fire, of course, was paramount. Early farmers learned to manage hearths, banking embers overnight to ensure a spark for the morning. A tricky business without matches or lighters. Every family had a designated fire tender, a crucial role in the fight against the encroaching cold. Head to the Fertile Crescent, the cradle of civilization, and you might imagine warm, sun-drenched lands year-round. But even Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates, experienced surprisingly harsh winters. While not as extreme as the deep north, cold snaps were frequent enough to pose a serious threat. The early Sumerians, Akkadians, and Babylonians, with their bustling cities and complex irrigation systems, were deeply dependent on their river networks. If the Tigris or Euphrates experienced unusual freezing, a rare but historically documented event, it could cripple trade, transport, and even limit access to water for the urban populations. Imagine your entire civilization's lifeline turning into a giant, unusable ice rink. That's a problem. Their primary defense against winter's bite was, once again, food storage. Massive granaries were central to Mesopotamian urban planning, carefully managed by priests and scribes. These structures weren't just for surplus. They were a hedge against the unpredictable, a buffer against famine caused by drought or an unexpected winter that killed young crops. They also built denser, more compact cities, allowing for more shared walls and thus a modicum of shared warmth within the urban sprawl. Now, ancient Egypt. land of eternal sun, right? Not entirely. While certainly warm for most of the year, Egypt, especially the northern delta, experienced cold winters. And like Mesopotamia, their entire existence revolved around a single river, the Nile. Unusual freezing of the Nile was a catastrophe. Imagine the lifeblood of your civilization, the source of all agriculture, transport, and daily life, slowing to a glacial pace. Though rare, historical records and geological evidence suggest that some particularly severe cold periods could impact the Nile's flow, disrupting the vital annual flood and threatening the very foundation of Egyptian society. Their adaptation? Grain. Egypt was the granary of the ancient world. Pharaohs and their administrators obsessively managed grain storage, building colossal granaries across the land. This wasn't just for prosperity. It was an insurance policy against the unpredictable whims of the climate, whether that was a low flood due to drought or crop failure from an unusually harsh winter. Clothing in Egypt was primarily linen, light and breathable for the intense heat. But for the colder months, wool cloaks and thicker linen garments were common, especially among the elite who could afford them. Mud brick homes, while excellent insulators against summer heat, still relied on hearth fires for warmth during the chillier nights. And those flat roofs? Great for stargazing, not so great for snow accumulation. Though heavy snow was rare, cold rain and wind were not. The Harappan civilization, nestled in the Indus Valley, modern-day Pakistan and northwest India, faced a different kind of frost, the slow, insidious chill of climate change. While not directly about freezing temperatures, their struggles highlight how vital climatic stability was for ancient civilizations. The Indus Valley people built meticulously planned cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, boasting advanced urban planning, sophisticated water management systems, and impressive granaries. These were hallmarks of a resilient, organized society. However, their eventual decline, starting around 1900 BCE, is widely believed to be linked to shifts in the monsoon patterns. As the monsoons became weaker and more erratic, vital water sources dried up, leading to agricultural collapse and forcing mass migrations. While not a brutal winter in the traditional sense, it was a climate-driven crisis that devastated a thriving civilization, showing how dependent these early societies were on specific, fragile climatic conditions. Now, if you want real ancient brutal winters, look to northern China. The Yellow River Plains, the birthplace of Chinese civilization, experienced bitterly cold, long winters. The Lus Plateau, with its deep, dusty soil, could freeze solid for months. Ancient Chinese record, meticulously kept, contained numerous accounts of severe winters causing widespread famine, livestock deaths, and mass migrations. This forced constant adaptation. They developed substantial fur and thick, layered clothing from hemp and silk for the wealthy. To combat the cold, perhaps one of the most ingenious adaptations was the Kong system. While becoming widespread in later periods, its roots lie in ancient communal heating. This was a heated bed, essentially a raised platform built over a brick or mud-packed flue that carried hot air and smoke from an indoor stove or outdoor fire pit. It provided a continuous, radiant heat, allowing families to sleep warmly even when outdoor temperatures plummeted. It was rudimentary central heating, centuries ahead of its time. The Chinese also centralized food distribution on a massive scale, building monumental granaries and complex logistical networks to move grain from productive regions to those suffering from winter-induced famines. This state-level adaptation was critical for surviving the periodic, devastating cold. Sometimes, no matter how clever your adaptations, winter just wins. The Late Bronze Age collapse, a period of widespread societal collapse across the Mediterranean and Near East around 1200 BCE, is a stark example. While complex, a major contributing factor is believed to have been a period of severe climate change. Multiple lines of evidence, including tree rings, ice cores, and marine sediments, suggest a sudden, sustained drought across a region, coupled with unusually cold winters. Imagine once fertile lands turning barren, once navigable seas freezing, and trade routes grinding to a halt. The simultaneous climate shock crippled agriculture, leading to widespread famine across the great empires of the Hittites, Egyptians, Mycenaeans, and others. The breakdown of food supplies led to internal unrest, migrations of desperate populations, like the mysterious Sea Peoples, and eventually, the collapse of entire political and economic systems. It was a struggle against the frost and drought, where existing adaptations simply couldn't cope with the scale of the crisis, plunging a sophisticated world into centuries of darkness. Further north, or in the vast steppes of Central Asia, life was always a brutal winter adaptation. Early European settlers and nomadic steppe tribes like the Scythians or early Germanic peoples lived in direct, constant confrontation with extreme cold. Their adaptations were fundamental. Asterisk clothing and shelter asterisk animal hides, and furs were paramount. Layered furs provided unparalleled insulation. Shelters were designed for maximum heat retention. Semi-subterranean pit houses in some settled areas, or highly portable, well-insulated tents, like early yurts, for nomads. Asterisk pastoralism asterisk. These cultures relied heavily on livestock, not just for food, but for wool, hides, and mobility. Animals were mobile food sources, but also mobile warmth providers, herded into sheltered enclosures or even shared living spaces when temperatures dropped. Asterisk nomadic lifestyle asterisk for many. The very act of nomadism was an adaptation. Moving south with their herds to avoid the most extreme winter conditions, returning north with the spring thaws. Asterisk enclosed fires asterisk fire pits moved indoors, with smoke vented through small holes or rudimentary chimneys, maximizing precious heat in enclosed spaces. Ultimately, the struggles of ancient civilizations against brutal winters highlight a few crucial points. Asterisk direct exposure asterisk without modern technology, humanity was directly exposed. No quick fixes, no instant warmth. Asterisk famine and disease asterisk, these were winter's silent, deadliest companions. The cold weakened bodies, concentrated populations in unhygienic shelters, and killed crops, leading to widespread starvation and rampant disease. Asterisk community and resource sharing asterisk survival often depended on communal effort, shared resources, and the willingness of neighbors to help each other simply to survive. Asterisk divine intervention asterisk for many, the unpredictable and devastating nature of extreme cold was seen as divine will, a punishment or test from the gods. Rituals and prayers were as vital as granaries. These ancient societies didn't have climate science as we know it, but they intimately understood the power of a cold, unforgiving winter. Their adaptations, born of necessity, laid the groundwork for how future generations would continue to battle the frost, shaping everything from our architecture to our diets. But they also learned, sometimes fatally, that nature always bats last. Okay, so we've journeyed back to the very dawn of humanity, shivering alongside our ancestors as they braved world-spanning ice ages, adapting with fire and fur to a planet literally encased in ice. We've even taken a peek at how ancient civilizations, in their early attempts to build settled societies, battle localized but still devastating cold snaps. But what if I told you that humanity faced another major, sustained period of global cooling much more recently? One that dramatically reshaped societies, triggered revolutions, inspired art, and even fueled famines. One that didn't involve woolly mammoths, but did involve frozen rivers and desperate struggles against the frost? Tonight, we're sailing into the heart of the Little Ice Age. Now, the name itself can be a little misleading. When you hear Ice Age, you probably picture glaciers grinding continents and temperatures that turn everything into a popsicle stick. The Little Ice Age wasn't quite that dramatic. It wasn't a full-blown, planet-reforming glaciation like the Pleistocene epoch we discussed earlier. Think of it more as a prolonged period of unusual, unpredictable, and often devastating global cooling, interspersed with warmer decades that gripped much of the Earth for centuries. It was a Little Ice Age, but its impacts were anything but small. So, when exactly did this chill settle in? Well, unlike a sudden blizzard, the Little Ice Age didn't have a clear starting gun. Scientists generally agree it began somewhere in the late 13th or early 14th century, intensifying over time, and then gradually retreated to the mid-19th century. We're talking about a period roughly from the early 1300s to the mid-1800s, a significant chunk of human history, encompassing the late medieval period, the Renaissance, and much of the early modern era. That's over 500 years of unpredictable cold. And unpredictable is a key word here. The Little Ice Age wasn't one continuous, steady deep freeze. Instead, it was characterized by periods of intense cold, what scientists call mini maxima, punctuated by relatively milder decades. It was like a particularly grumpy landlord constantly fiddling with the thermostat, sometimes cranking it down to unbearable lows, then letting it warm up just enough to give you false hope before plunging it back into the frost. This fluctuating nature made it even harder for societies to adapt, because they couldn't count on stable patterns. You might have a few decent years, then bam, a winter so brutal it destroys crops and livestock, followed by a soggy, cold summer that makes next year's harvest just as grim. But what caused this widespread chill? That's a question scientists still debate, and it's likely a combination of factors playing out across the globe. One major suspect is solar activity. We're talking about sunspots, those dark, cooler regions on the sun's surface that indicate periods of increased magnetic activity. During the Little Ice Age, there were prolonged periods of reduced sunspot activity, most famously the Maunder Minimum, roughly 1645 to 1715, and the Spore Minimum, roughly 1460 to 1550. Fewer sunspots might mean less solar radiation reaching Earth, leading to a cooler planet. It's like the cosmic dimmer switch being turned down a notch. Another strong contender is volcanic activity. The Little Ice Age coincided with several massive volcanic eruptions around the world. When a volcano explodes with enough force, it blasts enormous amounts of ash, sulfate aerosols, and other particulates high into the atmosphere. These tiny particles act like a massive sunshade, reflecting incoming solar radiation back into space. Imagine a constant, global smog cloud that chills the planet. The eruption of Tambora in Indonesia in 1815, for example, famously caused a year without a summer in 1816, leading to widespread crop failures and famine across the northern hemisphere. Laki in Iceland in 1783, 84 caused similar chaos. Multiple such events, especially clustered together, could have had a cumulative chilling effect, triggering feedback loops that amplified the cold. Beyond cosmic and geological forces, scientists have even looked at oceanic circulation. Changes in major ocean currents, particularly the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation AMOC, could have played a role. A slowdown or shift in these currents might have meant less warm water making its way northward, contributing to cooler temperatures in the North Atlantic and Europe. Think of it as the planet's internal heating system getting a bit sluggish. And here's an intriguing, if more controversial, theory: early human impact. Some researchers propose that the massive depopulation of the Americas after European colonization, due to disease, warfare, and forced labor, led to a significant reforestation of vast tracts of land that were once managed by indigenous populations. More trees mean more carbon dioxide being absorbed from the atmosphere, which could have contributed to a slight global cooling. It's a fascinating, if subtle, example of how human activity can inadvertently influence climate even before the industrial age. Whatever the precise cocktail of causes, the result was undeniable: a colder world. Rivers and lakes that rarely froze over today did so regularly, sometimes for months. Glaciers expanded dramatically in many mountainous regions. Sea ice grew thicker and extended further south in the North Atlantic, making shipping hazardous and even changing traditional fishing grounds. But here's the really crucial part. This wasn't just a European phenomenon. The Little Ice Age truly was a global event. While Europe often gets the most attention, and we'll dedicate a whole section to its struggles soon, the chill was felt far beyond its borders. Asterisk in Asia, asterisk China experienced severely cold winters during the Ming and Qing dynasties. Historical records detail periods of devastating drought and famine, leading to widespread social unrest and contributing to the collapse of the Ming dynasty in the mid-17th century. Frost-damaged citrus groves that had thrived for centuries, indicating a significant drop in temperatures. Japan also suffered its share of crop failures and famines, triggering rebellions and leading to demographic shifts. Asterisk in the Americas, asterisk European colonizers faced brutal conditions. The early Jamestown settlement in Virginia, early 17th century, endured a particularly harsh cold period, which contributed significantly to high mortality rates and the infamous starving time. Indigenous populations, already grappling with disease and displacement, faced additional pressures from shifting agricultural patterns and environmental stress. The Arctic and subarctic regions, home to Inuit and other indigenous groups, experienced a significant expansion of sea ice, impacting traditional hunting and travel. Asterisk in Africa asterisk, while less affected by direct temperature drops in the same way as the higher latitudes, parts of Africa experienced shifts in rainfall patterns, leading to prolonged droughts in regions like the Sahel. These climatic stressors could have disrupted local agriculture, contributed to famine, and potentially impacted existing trade networks with regions suffering more directly from the cold. Asterisk across the poles asterisk evidence from ice cores drilled in Greenland and Antarctica and studies of glacier advances in places like the Andes and the Himalayas all corroborate the global nature of this cooling trend. Glaciers surge forward, devouring forests and farmlands, leaving their silent, icy marks on the landscape. The consequences for human societies were profound, echoing many of the themes we touched upon in defining a brutal winter. Asterisk agricultural collapse and famine, asterisk shorter growing seasons, increased frost days, and unpredictable weather patterns led to repeated crop failures. This, in turn, sparked widespread famine, leading to malnutrition and mass mortality. For societies largely dependent on local agriculture, this was a direct blow to the jugular. Asterisk disease and public health crises asterisk weakened by hunger and exposure. Populations became highly susceptible to disease. Epidemics often followed famines, turning already dire situations into apocalyptic scenarios. Asterisk economic disruption, asterisk frozen rivers and seas halted trade. Agricultural decline crippled local economies. Fishing industries suffered due to changes in fish migration patterns and increased sea ice. Asterisk social and political instability, asterisk hardship often breeds unrest. Famine and economic distress contributed to peasant rebellions, urban riots, and in some cases, the downfall of dynasties and governments. People, desperate for food and relief, often turned their anger on those in power. Asterisk migration and displacement, asterisk people moved in search of warmer climates or more fertile lands, leading to demographic shifts and new pressures on existing communities. The Little Ice Age wasn't just a physical phenomenon. It permeated culture, art, and even human psychology. You see it reflected in the darker, more somber themes in art. The increase in winter landscapes painted by artists like Peter Bruegel the Elder in the Dutch Golden Age, capturing a world where frost and snow were omnipresent features of daily life. Even fashion adapted, with heavier clothing becoming more prevalent. Eventually, by the mid-19th century, the grip of the Little Ice Age began to loosen. Glaciers retreated, temperatures gradually rose, and agricultural conditions improved, setting the stage for the industrial and technological revolutions that would further reshape human civilization. But the lessons of this extended chill were etched into history. Humanity, despite its ingenuity, remained vulnerable to the unpredictable whims of climate. And as we'll see next, nowhere were these impacts more vividly documented and profoundly felt than in Europe, a continent that, for centuries, lived under winter's frozen grip. Okay, so we've established that the Little Ice Age wasn't just a chilly period. It was a global phenomenon, a planetary shiver that lasted for centuries. But now let's zoom in. Let's really feel the bite of it, because nowhere was its impact more profoundly felt or more grimly documented than in Europe. Imagine a continent already grappling with post-plague recovery, religious upheaval, and nascent nation-states suddenly plunge into a relentless, sustained deep freeze. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was a fundamental assault on every aspect of human life. From the late 13th century, really picking up steam in the 16th and lasting until the mid-19th century, Europe became the unwilling star of the Little Ice Age show. What did this look like? Think longer, harsher winters, with more frequent and severe blizzards. Think colder, wetter summers, too short and too weak to properly ripen crops. Rivers and lakes that rarely froze before now did so regularly and for extended periods. Mountain glaciers, once retreating, began to surge forward, devouring everything in their path. This wasn't just colder weather. This was a climate actively working against civilization. Perhaps the most iconic and strangely festive manifestation of Europe's frozen grip was the Thames Frost Fairs in London. Picture it. One of the busiest, most vital waterways in the world, the River Thames, freezing solid enough for people to walk, play, and even build temporary markets on it. This wasn't a rare occurrence. During the deepest chills of the Little Ice Age, particularly in the 17th and early 18th centuries, the Thames froze over so completely that ice fairs became a regular winter spectacle. The first recorded great frost was in 1608, but the fairs really took off in the 1680s, driven by consistently brutal winters. Imagine the scene. Londoners, bundled in thick wool, trudging onto the frozen river, a rare moment of communal excitement born from environmental hardship. Booths sprung up, offering hot-roasted ox, ale and wine. Games like ninepins and skittles were played on the ice. Puppeteers and acrobats performed for shivering crowds. Printers set up presses directly on the ice, selling commemorative Frost Fair broadsides, often complete with jokes, songs, and the names of those who braved the cold to witness the spectacle. King Charles II himself reportedly ventured onto the frozen Thames. It sounds almost idyllic, a whimsical winter wonderland. But beneath the veneer of revelry, these fairs were a stark reminder of the cold's devastating power. The freezing of the Thames crippled trade, as ships couldn't reach London's docks, disrupting supply chains and causing widespread economic hardship. The fun of the fair masked the very real hunger and desperation that often accompanied such brutal winters, especially for the city's poorer inhabitants. While the English made their fun on the ice, the Netherlands and Low Countries faced an even more profound disruption. For a region whose very existence was intertwined with water, canals for transport, fishing for livelihood, trade for wealth, a consistently frozen landscape was catastrophic. The iconic winter scenes of the Dutch Golden Age painters, with their frozen canals, skaters, and figures huddled against the biting wind, aren't just artistic expressions. They're direct historical records of the Little Ice Age's impact. Painters like Hendrik Averkamp and Jan van Goyen didn't just romanticize winter, they depicted the harsh reality of their time. Their canvases are filled with people navigating treacherous ice, relying on skates and sleds as their primary mode of transport when waterways, usually bustling with barges and boats, became solid, impassable barriers. This wasn't quaint. It meant trade routes were severed, goods couldn't move, and the vibrant economic life of the Dutch Republic seized up, leading to widespread unemployment and poverty. The cost of living soared as food and fuel became scarce. The very prosperity of a nation built on trade was under direct assault by the persistent chill. Further south, in the majestic Alps, the Little Ice Age manifested with a terrifying, slow-motion brutality. Advancing glaciers. For centuries, these frozen rivers have been relatively stable. But now, pushed by colder temperatures and increased snowfall, they began to creep forward, relentless and unstoppable. Alpine communities, nestled in valleys that had been safe for generations, suddenly found themselves in the path of crushing ice. Villages like Glech in Switzerland saw their fields and homes slowly swallowed by the Rhone Glacier. In France, the Argentière and Bossons glaciers surged, burying farmlands, roads, and even entire houses. Farmers watched helplessly as their pastures were turned into frozen wasteland, their livelihoods destroyed by an elemental force they couldn't possibly fight. The advancing ice led to increased avalanches, landslides, and flooding when the glaciers melted seasonally, adding further layers of danger and uncertainty to an already precarious existence. People were forced to abandon ancestral lands, becoming climate refugees in their own time, their stories etched not in historical texts, but in the cold, unforgiving advance of the ice. The agricultural heart of Europe, particularly France and Germany, felt the chill directly in their stomachs. The Little Ice Age brought shorter growing seasons, more frequent frosts, and colder, wetter conditions overall. This had a devastating impact on staple crops like wheat, barley, and oats, leading to repeated harvest failures. For societies utterly dependent on local agriculture, this meant one thing: famine. The early 17th century, for example, saw widespread and severe famines across France, leading to countless deaths from starvation and disease. The weakened populations were more susceptible to the spread of illness, creating deadly feedback loops. Even luxury crops weren't spared. The renowned wine regions of France and Germany suffered immensely. Grapes, needing warmth and sunshine to ripen, struggled in the cooler climate. Vineyards that thrived for centuries were abandoned or shifted to hardier, but less profitable crops. Some wine production moved southward, altering the agricultural landscape of entire regions. The very taste of European culture was reshaped by the cold, as once common wines became rare and expensive. Across the North Sea, Scandinavia and Northern Europe experienced an even more extreme version of the Little Ice Age's wrath. Already accustomed to harsh winters, the prolonged cold pushed these regions to their absolute limits. Fishing fleets, vital to the coastal economies, were often icebound for months, leading to food shortages and economic collapse in port towns. In Norway, abandoned farms became a common sight as communities struggled to survive on dwindling resources. Iceland, in particular, was severely impacted. See, ice became a constant presence around its coast, cutting off trade routes for months or even years, leading to isolation and famine. Records from Iceland speak of widespread starvation, livestock dying off, and a significant decline in population during the harshest periods. Greenland, once a thriving Viking settlement, saw its Norse communities entirely vanish during the Little Ice Age, believed to have succumbed to increasing cold, crop failures, and loss of vital sea lanes that connected them to Europe. While complex factors contributed, the relentless cold was certainly a major player in their silent demise. Beyond the immediate cold, the interconnected consequences of Europe's frozen grip were truly catastrophic. Famine and disease. This was the most direct and deadly impact. Repeated crop failures, exacerbated by frozen rivers preventing food transport, led to widespread starvation. Weakened by hunger, populations became incredibly vulnerable to disease. The 17th century, a particularly brutal phase of the Little Ice Age, saw recurrent epidemics of plague, typhus, and dysentery sweep across Europe, often following periods of intense cold and famine. Imagine entire villages decimated, not just by frostbite, but by the slow, agonizing grind of hunger and subsequent illness. Economic collapse. The freezing of rivers and seas crippled trade networks, leading to shortages of goods, inflated prices, and mass unemployment, particularly in urban centers and port cities. Agricultural losses meant economic ruin for peasants and a decline in tax revenue for states, further destabilizing already fragile economies. Social unrest and political instability. Desperation, fueled by hunger and poverty, often boiled over into social unrest. Food riots became common, as starving peasants sometimes attacked grain convoys or royal storehouses. Some historians even link periods of political instability, such as the various crises of the 17th century, which saw numerous wars, revolts, and revolutions across Europe, partly to the environmental stress of the Little Ice Age. The sheer psychological toll of constant cold, darkness, and the struggle for survival contributed to widespread despair and fatalism. Cultural shifts and witchcraft accusations. The pervasive cold left an indelible mark on European culture. As mentioned, Dutch painting embraced winter landscapes. In literature, there was an increased focus on the harshness of nature. Folklore began to feature more stories of ice spirits, frost giants, and long, dark winters. More chillingly, some historians suggest a correlation between periods of intense cold and an increase in witchcraft accusations, as desperate communities sought scapegoats for inexplicable crop failures and livestock deaths. While not a direct cause, the widespread fear and anxiety created by a hostile environment likely exacerbated existing superstitions and fueled persecution. In essence, Europe during the Little Ice Age was a continent under siege by its own climate. From the frozen Thames to the advancing Alpine glaciers, from starving French peasants to ice-locked Scandinavian fishermen, the relentless chill-shaped landscapes, crippled economies, decimated populations, and fundamentally altered the course of human history. It was a period where human ingenuity and resilience were tested to their absolute limits, forging societies that learned to endure, adapt, and remember the chilling power of a truly brutal winter. And as we'll see next, this cold didn't just impact daily life. It became a silent, brutal commander on the battlefields of Europe. We've talked about how brutal winters reshape landscapes, devastate economies, and push human endurance to its absolute breaking point. But there's another stage where winter often shows its most merciless hand, the battlefield. For centuries, military commanders have learned, often through catastrophic failure, that the cold isn't just an environmental factor. It is, unequivocally, a battlefield commander directing strategy, dictating movement, and often inflicting more casualties than any enemy army. Imagine a general, not in a uniform, but cloaked in biting winds, wielding a scythe of frost. This general doesn't need to strategize troop movements or devise flanking maneuvers. It simply needs to exist. Its weapons are hypothermia, frostbite, blizzards, and frozen supply lines. Its strategy is attrition, slowly grinding down armies until they become brittle, desperate, and utterly defeated, often before a single shot is fired. Throughout history, countless campaigns have been crippled, empires brought to their knees, and the course of nations irrevocably altered, not by superior enemy tactics, but by the relentless, indifferent cruelty of winter. The first way winter acts as a general is by crippling logistics. An army, as they say, marches on its stomach. But in winter, it also marches on its fuel, its warm clothing, its dry boots, and its ability to transport supplies over frozen, snow-choked terrain. Food spoils or freezes solid, becoming indigestible. Water sources freeze over, leading to dehydration. Horses, essential for transport in most historical conflicts, struggle or die in the deep snow, leaving heavy artillery and wagons stranded. Fuel for cooking and warmth becomes a desperate necessity, not a luxury. Foraging becomes impossible in a frozen, barren landscape, forcing armies to rely entirely on dwindling, easily disrupted supply lines. Imagine trying to move tens of thousands of men, their weapons, their food, and their horses across hundreds of miles of frozen wilderness, with temperatures plunging far below zero. Every mile becomes a battle against elements, a slow, agonizing death march for both man and beast. Beyond logistics, winter launches a direct assault on the soldiers themselves. Hypothermia sets in a slow, insidious draining of body heat that robs men of their strength, their coordination, and ultimately their lives. Frostbite turns extremities black, leading to gangrene and amputation, crippling men even if they survive the initial exposure. Simple tasks become monumental struggles. Loading a frozen rifle, operating stiff machinery, or even just tying a bootlace with numb fingers becomes an agonizing test. Morale plummets as the cold seeps into every fiber of a soldier's being, replacing courage with desperation and discipline with a primal urge for warmth and survival. Equipment, too, fails. Lubricants freeze, metal becomes brittle and snaps, engines seize, and even ammunition can become unreliable. Winter doesn't just kill, it dehumanizes, stripping away everything but the raw instinct to survive. Perhaps the most famous and devastating example of winter as a battlefield commander is Napoleon's disastrous retreat from Moscow in 1812. Napoleon, at the height of his power, assembled the largest army Europe had ever seen, over 600,000 men from across his vast empire, and marched into Russia in June, determined to force Tsar Alexander I to submit. He pushed deep into Russian territory, expecting a decisive battle. The Russians, however, largely refused to engage in pitched battles, instead employing a scorched earth policy, burning crops and villages as they retreated, leaving nothing for Grand Army to forage or quarter in. By the time Napoleon reached Moscow in September, the city itself was ablaze, offering no respite. Winter, however, was just beginning to stir. Napoleon famously waited too long in Moscow, hoping for a peace offer that never came. By mid-October, with no supplies and the first snowflakes falling, he had no choice but to order a retreat. This was no orderly withdrawal. It was an epic, agonizing death march. The brutal Russian winter arrived early and with a vengeance. Temperatures plummeted, often reaching minus 30 degrees Celsius and even lower. The roads, already churned into muddy quagmires by the initial advance, froze solid, then became impassable sheets of ice and deep snow. Horses, already weakened by lack of forage and heavy loads, collapsed and died by the tens of thousands, leaving artillery and supply wagons abandoned. Soldiers, many from warmer climates, were ill-equipped for such extremes. Their summer uniforms offered little protection against the piercing winds and relentless cold. Frostbite ravaged their extremities, turning fingers, toes, and ears black. Hypothermia claimed thousands as they huddled together, shivering through endless nights. Discipline broke down. Men resorted to desperate measures, fighting over scraps of food, stripping dead comrades of their clothing, even resorting to cannibalism in the most horrific accounts. The cold was a constant, biting presence, stealing body heat with every breath, every step. The Russian army, though still a threat, often simply picked off the stragglers and those too weakened by the cold to resist. Disease, particularly typhus, also ran rampant through the starving, freezing ranks. Of the original 600,000 men who marched into Russia, fewer than 100,000 returned, many of them invalids. Napoleon's seemingly invincible Grand Army had been utterly decimated, not by cannon fire, but by the relentless, silent side of the Russian winter. It was a defeat that shattered the myth of Napoleonic invincibility and irrevocably altered the course of European history. Fast forward to the 20th century, and the lessons of 1812 still hadn't fully sunk in for some. In 1939, the Soviet Union launched an invasion of Finland, initiating what became known as the Winter War. Stalin expected a swift victory against a tiny Finnish army. He severely underestimated the Finns' resolve, their mastery of their frigid homeland, and the brutal power of winter itself. The Finnish army, though massively outnumbered and outgunned, was uniquely adapted to fighting in extreme cold. They wore white camouflage, moved swiftly on skis through deep snow, and were experts in Mahdi tactics, surrounding and breaking up larger Soviet formations into isolated pockets, which they then systematically destroyed. The Red Army, on the other hand, was largely unprepared. Their soldiers wore dark, easily spotted uniforms. Their tanks and trucks struggled to navigate the deep snow and frozen forests, often becoming bogged down or running out of fuel. Soviet supply lines, already overstretched, broke down in the bitter cold. Thousands of Soviet soldiers suffered from severe frostbite and hypothermia. They froze in their trenches, their equipment seizing up in the sub-zero temperatures. Their officers, adhering to rigid, inflexible tactics, sent wave after wave of men into the snowy maw, only to be met by a cunning, highly mobile Finnish defense. The Finns, often fighting in temperatures as low as minus 40 degrees Celsius, used the cold as an ally, employing it to cripple Soviet morale and logistics. They left campfires burning to attract freezing Soviet soldiers, only to ambush them. They used the frozen lakes as killing fields, trapping Soviet units. Despite their overwhelming numerical superiority, the Soviets suffered catastrophic casualties, losing hundreds of thousands of men and vast amounts of equipment. Though Finland ultimately ceded some territory, they avoided full occupation, dealing a massive blow to Soviet prestige and demonstrating winter's continued capacity to humble even the largest military forces. The stage was set for another infamous winter conflict in World War II, the Battle of Stalingrad, 1942 to 1943. Hitler, intent on seizing the city and its vital oil fields, committed enormous forces to the Eastern Front. Again, the Germans, confident after their early successes in the summer, were woefully unprepared for the Russian winter. As temperatures plunged to minus 30 degrees Celsius and below, the German Sixth Army, trapped in the ruins of Stalingrad, faced a multi-front assault. Fierce Soviet resistance in brutal street-to-street fighting, dwindling supplies, and the relentless, soul-crushing cold. German soldiers, often clad in inadequate clothing, suffered horrific frostbite and hypothermia. Their equipment, designed for warmer climates, seized up. Vehicles wouldn't start, lubricants froze, and weapons malfunctioned. The Luftwaffe, relied upon for air supply, struggled to fly in the extreme conditions, with planes often freezing on the ground or crashing due to mechanical failures. The Soviets, seasoned by their own harsh winters and a doctrine of fighting to the last man, were comparatively better equipped and mentally prepared for conditions. They understood the cold as an ally, using it to their advantage in urban warfare, where every ruined building offered a potential strong point or a freezing death trap. The cold amplified every problem: starvation, disease, lack of ammunition. German soldiers, huddled in frozen cellars, fought a desperate, losing battle against the elements as much as against the Red Army. The eventual surrender of the German Sixth Army, trapped and annihilated in the cauldron of Stalingrad, was a turning point in World War II. It was a monumental defeat for the Wehrmacht, a direct consequence not only of tenacious Soviet defense, but of winter's merciless grip on the battlefield. Even modern armies, with all their technological advancements, are not immune. The chosen reservoir campaign during the Korean War, 1950, serves as a stark reminder. After successful Incheon landings, UN forces, primarily U.S. Marines, pushed deep into North Korea, believing the war was almost over. They encountered fierce resistance from massive, unexpected Chinese forces, who launched human wave attacks in brutal, mountainous terrain. But beyond the enemy, the UN forces faced a far more formidable foe, the Korean winter. Temperatures plummeted to an unimaginable minus 35 degrees Celsius, with wind chills dropping even lower. The conditions were apocalyptic. Lubricants and weapons froze solid, turning automatic rifles into single-shot relics. Vehicles wouldn't start, leaving desperately needed supplies and wounded soldiers stranded. Frostbite became rampant, inflicting agonizing pain and permanently disfiguring thousands of soldiers whose summer gear offered no protection against the extreme cold. Meals froze solid in their rations, and water became a precious, elusive commodity. Even plasma for transfusions froze. The Chinese, though also suffering from the cold, were often better acclimatized and sometimes more lightly equipped, enabling faster movement in the snow. Despite being surrounded and fighting a numerically superior enemy in unimaginable conditions, the Marines fought their way out in what became known as a tactical withdrawal rather than retreat, inflicting heavy casualties on the Chinese. Yet, the cost and human suffering from the cold was immense. The Chosen Reservoir Campaign is forever etched in military history as a testament to human endurance, but also as a chilling example of how winter can turn even the most technologically advanced army into a shivering, desperate force fighting for mere survival. The lessons from these brutal encounters have, at times, been learned. Armies that mastered cold weather warfare, such as the Finns and the Russians, developed specialized equipment, tactics, and mental resilience that allowed them to turn the seemingly insurmountable challenges of winter into a strategic advantage. White camouflage, skis for rapid movement, insulated clothing, and a deep understanding of snow and ice conditions became critical. They learned to operate vehicles and weapons in extreme cold, often using specialized lubricants or heating methods. More importantly, they cultivated a psychological edge, accepting the cold not as an enemy to be feared, but as an unforgiving ally that would decimate their less prepared opponents. In modern warfare, despite heated tents, advanced insulated gear, and specialized Arctic vehicles, winter still poses immense challenges. Arctic training, specialized equipment, and extreme cold weather operations remain critical components of military readiness. From polar vortexes gripping military bases to unexpected blizzards disrupting supply chains, the unpredictable fury of winter continues to be a factor that no commander can ignore. The cold remains a silent, merciless general, demanding respect, preparation, and a willingness to endure or face the same fate as countless armies before them, swallowed by the brutal, unforgiving side of winter's wrath. Okay, so we've journeyed back to the very dawn of humanity, shivering alongside our ancestors as they brave world-spanning ice ages, adapting with fire and fur to a planet literally encased in ice. We've even taken a peek at how ancient civilizations, in their early attempts to build settled societies, battle localized but still devastating cold snaps. We've seen how the Little Ice Age reshaped economies and societies, and how winter itself acted as a merciless general on the battlefield. But the brutal cold doesn't just kill through hypothermia or frostbite alone. It's often a silent accomplice, setting the stage for two of humanity's oldest and most terrifying adversaries, famine and disease. Tonight, we're delving into winter's darkest symphony, the silent killers, famine, disease, and the winter apocalypse. Because when the temperatures plunge and the snow piles high, the real terror often lurks unseen, waiting to slowly, insidiously squeeze the life out of entire populations. Let's start with famine, the winter starvation. Imagine a winter so long, so cold, so relentlessly unforgiving that the very ground refuses to yield sustenance. This isn't just about a few extra layers or a higher heating bill. This is about the total collapse of food systems. How does a brutal winter transform into mass starvation? It's a multi-pronged assault. First, there's crop failure. A prolonged cold snap or an unseasonably early or late frost can decimate an entire harvest. For agrarian societies, which was most of humanity for millennia, a single lost harvest could be catastrophic. Imagine the grain, so carefully cultivated through spring and summer, suddenly freezing in the fields or rotting in the wet, unyielding earth. Even if the immediate harvest survived, brutal winters often led to cold, with springs that prevented planting for the next season, creating a devastating multi-year cycle of hunger. Then, the loss of livestock. Animals, essential for food, labor, and warmth, remember shared living spaces, are incredibly vulnerable to extreme cold and lack of forage. They freeze to death, succumb to disease, or simply starve when snow covers their grazing lands or feed runs out. Without animals, communities lose not only a direct food source, but also plowing power, transport, and a vital source of protein and fat needed to survive the cold. Perhaps most critically, transportation breakdown. When rivers freeze solid for months, when roads vanish under impassable snowdrifts or mountain passes become death traps of ice, entire regions become isolated. Trade stops. Food cannot be moved from areas of surplus to areas of scarcity. Imagine being trapped in your village, watching your food stores dwindle, knowing that just 100 miles away there might be enough to save you, but there's no way to get it. Historically, this meant communities were entirely dependent on whatever meager resources they had stockpiled locally. A single brutal winter could exhaust these reserves, leading directly to widespread famine. People starved not just from lack of food, but from the inability to reach what little food might exist elsewhere. Consider the Great Famine of 1315-1317 in Europe. This wasn't just about winter, but it perfectly illustrates winter's role as a catalyst. This catastrophe, occurring at the very onset of the Little Ice Age, was triggered by exceptionally cold and wet summers. Rain deluged crops, and unseasonal cold prevented proper ripening. Harvests failed across vast swathes of Europe. What followed was 3 years of unimaginable suffering. Grain prices skyrocketed, meat became a luxury, and people resorted to desperate measures. Historical accounts speak of widespread malnutrition, weakened immune systems, and then, the darkest whispers of all, cannibalism. Stories emerged of parents abandoning children, of desperate villagers devouring dogs, cats, and even the bodies of the recently deceased. It was an apocalypse of hunger and winter, with its icy grip and ability to cripple transportation and further drain resources, amplified every horror. Even in modern times, with all our global supply chains, extreme localized winters can still cause food shortages, isolating communities, and leading to distress when blizzards cut off deliveries for extended periods. Now, let's turn to disease, the winter plague. If famine is a slow strangulation, disease is often the swift, merciless blade, cutting down populations already weakened and vulnerable. Winter doesn't directly cause most diseases, but it creates the perfect breeding ground for them to thrive and spread with terrifying efficiency. The primary mechanism is weakened immune systems. Cold, combined with malnutrition from dwindling food supplies, places immense stress on the human body. People are constantly expending energy just to stay warm, leaving little reserve for fighting off pathogens. A simple cold can quickly escalate to pneumonia or bronchitis. A mere stomach bug can turn fatal when the body lacks the strength to fight back. Then, there's cramped living conditions. When temperatures plummet, people huddle together indoors for warmth, sometimes with their livestock. Ventilation is poor, hygiene is almost impossible, and pathogens spread like wildfire through shared breath, contaminated surfaces, and close physical contact. Respiratory illnesses like influenza, tuberculosis, and the common cold, which often turn deadly, run rampant. Poor hygiene and sanitation exacerbate the crisis. Fetching water for bathing or cleaning becomes a dangerous, energy-intensive task. Waste systems can freeze, leading to accumulations of human and animal waste. Dead bodies, human and animal, may go unburied in frozen ground, further spreading disease. Lice, fleas, and rats, carrying diseases like typhus and plague, thrive in these unsanitary, crowded conditions, moving easily from person to person. Limited medical care is the final blow. Doctors, if they even existed in remote areas, could not travel through snow-choked roads. Medical supplies dwindled. The sheer volume of sick and dying overwhelmed what meager resources were available. Traditional remedies, often ineffective to begin with, became utterly useless against widespread epidemics. Historically, brutal winters were often followed by devastating epidemics. While the Black Death mid-14th century wasn't directly caused by cold, its horrific impact was undoubtedly amplified by populations already weakened by previous periods of cold and hunger, creating prime conditions for the plague to sweep through. But direct winter-related diseases were just as deadly. Respiratory illnesses were constant killers, especially for the young and old. Consider typhus, the fever of armies. This louse-borne disease consistently decimated troops during winter campaigns. Napoleon's retreat from Moscow in 1812, as we discussed, was not just about cold and hunger, but about typhus running rampant, transmitted by lice in the unsanitary, freezing, and overcrowded conditions of the retreating Grand Army. Soldiers, already starving and hypothermic, had no defense against the fever, delirium, and eventual organ failure. The Irish potato famine, 1840s, while triggered by potato blight, became a human catastrophe amplified by brutal winters and subsequent disease. As people starved and were forced into overcrowded workhouses and poorhouses, typhus, cholera, dysentery, and scurvy swept through the population, often claiming more lives than starvation alone. The cold, wet conditions weakened the starving and made disease transmission almost inevitable. Even in modern history, in World War I and II, particularly during the sieges of cities like Leningrad, 1941 to 1944, winter, starvation, and disease formed a deadly triumvirate. Freezing temperatures, non-existent food supplies, and the utter breakdown of sanitation turned besieged populations into prey for typhus, dysentery, scurvy, and tuberculosis. The cold did not just kill, it delivered millions of victims directly to the silent assassins of disease. But the true definition of a brutal winter extends beyond just these atmospheric elements or even single killer agents. It lies in their interconnected consequences, particularly for human societies. Famine and disease don't act in isolation. They create a deadly feedback loop, a true winter apocalypse. Starvation weakens the body, making a perfect host for pathogens. Disease then spreads rapidly in crowded, desperate conditions, further hindering any attempts at food production, distribution, or even proper burial. It's a vicious cycle where one horror feeds the next. This cascade of suffering inevitably leads to social breakdown. Law and order crumble as desperation takes hold. Looting, crime, and violence increase as people fight for survival. Vulnerable populations, the elderly, children, the sick, are abandoned or simply left to die. The very fabric of society unravels under the relentless pressure. The psychological toll is immense. Beyond the physical hardship, the prolonged cold, darkness, constant hunger, and the pervasive threat of death take a heavy psychological toll. Despair, lethargy, seasonal affective disorder, long before that name, and mental exhaustion lead to widespread hopelessness and desperation. Morale plummets, replaced by a raw, primal struggle for existence. The ultimate consequence is demographic impact. Mass mortality leads to long-term population decline. Entire villages can be wiped out. Birth rates plummet as people lack the energy or hope to reproduce. Family structures are shattered, leaving generations scarred. This often fuels political instability. Hardship breeds unrest. Famine and economic distress contribute to peasant rebellions, urban riots, and in some cases, the downfall of dynasties and governments. People, desperate for food and relief, often turn their anger on those in power, blaming them for the environmental catastrophe they cannot control. Perhaps one of the most vivid modern examples of this cascading effect is a year without a summer in 1816. This global climate anomaly was caused by the massive eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia in 1815, which injected an enormous amount of ash and aerosols into the atmosphere, blocking sunlight, and causing global temperatures to plummet. The summer of 1816 in the northern hemisphere saw widespread frost, snow, and extreme cold, even in July and August. Crops failed globally, leading to widespread famine across Europe and North America. This triggered mass migrations, food riots, and, inevitably, severe disease outbreaks. A devastating typhus epidemic swept through Europe, exacerbated by malnutrition and the forced movement of desperate populations. It was a direct, undeniable link between extreme climate, even volcanically induced, and a full-blown human catastrophe driven by famine and disease. In essence, A truly brutal winter is not merely a weather event. It is a multifaceted assault on every aspect of human existence. It's when extreme temperatures combine with suffocating snow, treacherous ice, and piercing winds, all sustained for so long that they systematically dismantle the very infrastructure of survival. It's when the environment turns actively hostile, pushing humanity to its absolute limits, revealing both our fragility and, as we'll soon see, our incredible capacity for resilience. For centuries, our struggle against the cold is inextricably linked to our eternal battle against hunger and sickness, silent killers that amplify winter's wrath into a true apocalypse. All right, we've talked about winter as a killer of people, a trigger for famine, a commander on the battlefield. But sometimes, winter isn't content with just taking lives or breaking armies. Sometimes, it claims entire places. It erases them from a map, swallows them whole, leaving behind nothing but silent ruins, ghost towns etched into the landscape, or sometimes just a chilling gap in the historical record. Imagine a community, built with human grit and hope, sustained for generations, simply ceasing to exist, not from war or plague, but from the relentless, suffocating, silent wrath of cold. These are the vanished settlements, the places winter claimed for its own, perhaps the most famous, and certainly one of the most poignant, examples of winter's erasing power is the fate of the Norse settlements in Greenland. Picture it, the late 10th century. Leif Eriksson's father, Eric the Red, a Viking exile from Iceland, stumbles upon a vast green landmass. Optimistically, and perhaps strategically, he names it Greenland to entice settlers. And people came. Hundreds, then thousands, drawn by the promise of new land, rich hunting grounds, and an escape from the crowded, politically turbulent Nordic homelands. They established two main colonies, the eastern settlement, larger and more robust, and the western settlement, smaller and more isolated, both perched precariously on the southwestern coast. For nearly 400 years, these Norse communities thrived, or at least survived. They built churches, established farms, raised livestock, cattle, sheep, goats, hunted seals, walruses, and caribou, and maintained trade with their Scandinavian cousins, exporting valuable walrus ivory, hides, and falcons. Their society was deeply European in character, with stone longhouses, Catholic churches, and traditional farming practices. They were, in essence, Vikings adapting to the Arctic fringe. But then, the climate began to shift. This wasn't a sudden, dramatic plunge. This was a slow, insidious onset of the Little Ice Age, which we discussed earlier, starting roughly in the late 13th and intensifying into the 14th century. The North Atlantic got colder, much colder. The impacts were devastating and multi-layered. Asterisk agricultural collapse, asterisk the growing season, already short in Greenland, became even shorter and more unreliable. Temperatures plummeted, leading to shallower soil thaw and permafrost encroachment. Hay, essential for overwintering livestock, became scarce, leading to mass animal die-offs. The Norse, stubbornly clinging to their pastoral European roots, struggled to adapt their farming methods to the increasingly harsh conditions. They were farmers trying to farm in an icebox. Asterisk expanding sea ice, asterisk. This was perhaps the most critical blow. The North Atlantic became choked with more extensive and persistent sea ice. This made the treacherous voyage from Europe even more perilous, disrupting the vital trade routes that connected Greenland to the wider world. Without new supplies, tools, iron, and European goods, the isolated settlements became increasingly self-sufficient, but also increasingly vulnerable. The last known ship from Norway to Greenland was around 1410. After that, silence. Asterisk resource shift, asterisk. The increased sea ice also impacted traditional hunting grounds. Seals and walruses, critical sources of food and valuable trade goods, shifted their migration patterns, becoming harder for the Norse to hunt, while their Inuit neighbors, the Thule people, were expert cold-weather hunters who thrived in these very conditions. The Norse seemed reluctant to fully adopt their technologies, like harpoons or multi-person kayaks, or integrate their knowledge. There's evidence of trade and limited interaction, but not a full cultural assimilation that might have saved them. Asterisk isolation and rigidity, asterisk. As the climate worsened and trade dwindled, the Greenland Norse became increasingly isolated, both physically and culturally. Archaeological evidence suggests a decline in living standards, a decrease in imports, even basic iron tools, and a society that became increasingly rigid, perhaps clinging to old ways rather than radically adapting. They chose to be European farmers in the Arctic rather than becoming Arctic hunters. The end was not a dramatic, single event. It was a gradual fading. The western settlement was likely abandoned by the mid-14th century, its inhabitants either perishing, migrating further south, or attempting to sail back to Europe, a desperate, likely fatal gamble. The eastern settlement held on longer, a lonely beacon against the encroaching cold. The last written records from the Norse in Greenland date to 1408, an account of a wedding in Valsey Church. After that, nothing. When European ships eventually tried to re-establish contact in the 16th and 17th centuries, they found only silent ruins. Crumbling stone churches, collapsed longhouses, overgrown fields. No people. The Norse settlements had simply vanished, swallowed by the expanding ice and the relentless cold of the Little Ice Age. They weren't conquered. They were erased by winter's slow, unforgiving scythe, moving across the Atlantic. Early European colonial attempts in North America often faced similar, if less prolonged, struggles. While Jamestown ultimately survived, many others did not, with brutal winters playing a direct role in their demise. One stark example is the French colony of Charles-Bourg-Royal in modern-day Quebec, established in 1541 by Jacques Cartier and Jean-François de Laroque de Roberval. It was France's first attempt at permanent settlement in North America. They built a fort, houses, and cultivated land. But they drastically underestimated the Canadian winter. The first winter was horrific. Scurvy ravaged the colonists, killing dozens. The intense cold, deep snow, and thick ice were unlike anything they had ever experienced. Supplies froze, movement was severely restricted, and morale plummeted. By 1543, facing disease, extreme cold, and increasing hostility from the local Iroquois, the surviving colonists abandoned the settlement. When Roberval arrived with reinforcements later that year, he found only ruins. Charles-Bourg-Royal vanished, a stark reminder that even well-equipped expeditions could be undone by the unfamiliar ferocity of winter. The very idea of permanent French settlement in Canada was effectively vanished for over half a century until the early 17th century. Further north, in the vast expanse of Siberia and the Arctic, countless small settlements have risen and fallen, often directly due to the brutal demands of winter. Many were transient, for trading posts, mining camps, or temporary military outposts established during periods of resource extraction or strategic expansion. Unlike agricultural communities, these settlements weren't directly dependent on the growing season, but they were utterly reliant on fragile supply lines. Imagine a small group of Russian trappers establishing a remote Ostrog, fortified settlement, deep in the Siberian taiga, in the 17th or 18th century. For a time, it might thrive, sending valuable furs back to Moscow. But one exceptionally brutal winter, prolonged blizzards, temperatures plunging to minus 50 degrees Celsius for weeks, rivers freezing too thick for resupply boats to break through, could spell doom. Supplies would dwindle. Food caches would freeze solid, and without regular contact, isolated communities could simply disappear. There might be no survivors to tell the tale, leaving behind only frozen cabins slowly consumed by snow and ice, ghost towns of ambition swallowed by the vast, indifferent cold. Archaeological digs in Siberia and the Russian Far East frequently uncover such abandoned sites, mute testaments to human endurance against an overwhelming force. The same story plays out in mountain communities, particularly during periods of increased snowfall or prolonged cold snaps. Avalanches, directly triggered by heavy winter snow, can literally erase villages from a map in a matter of minutes. Entire communities can be buried, their inhabitants suffocated beneath tons of snow and ice. The remnants might only be discovered months later, if at all, when the spring thaw begins. This isn't ancient history. Even in modern times, remote mountain villages around the world are vulnerable to this sudden, devastating form of winter's wrath. Beyond direct burial, prolonged cold and heavy snow can lead to extreme isolation, cutting off mountain settlements from any form of outside support. Starvation, disease, and the inability to reach medical aid can lead to slow, agonizing demise, forcing any survivors to abandon their homes once the snow finally melts, leaving behind silent, empty cabins to decay. What binds these diverse examples, from a Greenland Norse to remote Siberian outposts and vanished mountain villages, is a common thread: the brutal, sustained nature of winter as an environmental eraser. It's not just about a few cold days. It's about a season that outstays its welcome, stretching into months, sometimes years, systematically dismantling the very infrastructure of human survival. Societal rigidity often played a cruel role. The Norse, with their strong cultural identity, struggled to adopt the radically different survival strategies of their Inuit neighbors, who were perfectly adapted to the escalating cold. Early European colonists often brought with them agricultural and building practices ill-suited for the harsh New World, leading to catastrophic failure. Winter exposed these vulnerabilities with unforgiving efficiency. Ultimately, these vanished settlements serve as chilling reminders of humanity's delicate balance with nature. They are ghost towns in the truest sense, places where life simply stopped, consumed by an elemental force, leaving behind nothing but the quiet testimony of their ruins and the silent, enduring power of winter's wrath. They are etched into history not by what they achieved, but by what they lost. Everything. All right, we've trudged through the bone-chilling realities of history's most brutal winters. We've seen how ice ages shaped our earliest ancestors, how ancient civilizations fought frost with ingenuity and desperation, and how the Little Ice Age reshaped entire continents. We've even witnessed winter as a silent, merciless general on the battlefield. It's clear that throughout history, winter has been humanity's relentless adversary, a force that starves, sickens, and isolates. But here's the astonishing paradox. Despite winter's endless assault, humanity didn't just survive. We adapted, innovated, and, in many ways, thrived. We didn't just huddle and hope. We pushed back, evolving a remarkable arsenal of technologies, big and small, that allowed us to not merely endure the cold, but to conquer it. This isn't just a story of resilience. It's a testament to human ingenuity against the most elemental of forces. Let's start with a foundational breakthrough, something we briefly touched on earlier: the mastery of fire. For early hominids, controlling fire was the first monumental step towards cold survival. But control evolved. It wasn't just about having a roaring blaze. It was about creating sustained, manageable heat. Early humans learned to build simple hearths within caves or rudimentary shelters, directing smoke away while maximizing heat retention. They learned to bank embers, burying glowing coals under ash at night to preserve a spark for morning, a literal lifeline in a world without matches. This seemingly simple act meant not having to fight for warmth from scratch each day, conserving precious energy and resources. Fire became the beating heart of every cold-weather dwelling, evolving from a raw element into a carefully managed, indispensable technology. Hand in hand with fire came the evolution of clothing and shelter. Forget just wrapping yourself in a raw animal hide. As humans developed, so did their understanding of insulation. They learned to scrape, tan, and cure animal hides to make them pliable and durable. The invention of the bone needle and sinew thread was revolutionary, allowed the creation of fitted, multi-layered garments that trapped air, the key to effective insulation. Imagine tailored parkas from reindeer hide, fur-lined boots and mittens, all crafted to allow mobility while protecting against piercing winds and sub-zero temperatures. This second skin was crucial for expanding human habitable zones into colder regions. Shelters, too, became increasingly sophisticated, beyond natural caves. Early humans began constructing semi-subterranean dwellings, digging down into the earth to take advantage of its insulating properties. They built structures from mammoth bones, sod, and packed earth, creating homes that were significantly warmer and more protected than anything above ground. These dwellings were often designed with small, controlled entrances and no windows, minimizing heat loss. They weren't glamorous, but they were incredibly effective survival machines. As settled communities and agriculture emerged, the challenge of winter shifted from immediate survival to long-term planning. Food preservation and storage became a matter of life or death. Ancient farmers developed sophisticated techniques for drying, salting, smoking, and fermenting food, allowing them to stockpile provisions for the lean winter months. Massive granaries became central to ancient urban planning, meticulously managed a hedge against famine. Root cellars, dug deep into the earth, provided natural refrigeration for vegetables and fruits. The ability to reliably store calories transformed winter from a period of scarcity into a manageable, albeit difficult, season. The development of more permanent heating systems in settled societies also marked a major leap. While simple hearths remained common for most, some ancient civilizations innovated. The Roman hypocaust system, an underfloor heating system where hot air and smoke from a furnace circulated beneath raised floors, allowed for consistent, enveloping warmth in public baths and elite homes. Though a luxury, it demonstrated advanced thermal engineering. In ancient China, the Kong system, a heated bed or platform built over a brick flue that carried hot air and smoke from an indoor stove, provided continuous radiant heat, allowing families to sleep warmly even in bitterly cold northern winters. These technologies weren't just about comfort. They represented a systematic effort to engineer warmth into daily life, beyond personal warmth. Coping with winter meant mastering transportation and mobility across frozen landscapes. In regions of heavy snowfall, the invention of skis and snowshoes was a game changer. Originating millennia ago in northern Eurasia, skis allowed hunters and travelers to glide efficiently over deep snow, greatly expanding their range and access to resources during winter. Snowshoes, on the other hand, distributed weight more evenly, preventing individuals from sinking, making travel on foot possible where it would otherwise be impossible. These simple technologies unlocked vast swathes of winter terrain for hunting, trade, and even military maneuvers, as seen with the Finnish army's devastating use of skis in the Winter War. Sleds and sleighs also revolutionized winter transport. From early designs pulled by humans or dogs to larger versions drawn by reindeer or horses, sleds enabled the movement of heavy loads over snow and ice, vital for transporting food, firewood, and building materials. These vehicles were indispensable for communities living in northern latitudes, turning impassable terrain into efficient highways of ice. In some cases, frozen rivers and lakes became natural ice roads, allowing for rapid travel and trade that was impossible during warmer months, though always with the inherent dangers of unpredictable ice. As metallurgy advanced, so did the tools for winter survival. Iron and steel revolutionized everything from axes for splitting dense firewood to ice picks for fishing or mountaineering. Specialized hunting weapons adapted for winter conditions, such as stronger bows for colder temperatures or traps designed for deep snow, ensured continued food supply. In the frigid waters, the development of ice fishing techniques allowed communities to access protein year-round, turning frozen lakes into vital food sources. Fast forward to the modern era, and human ingenuity against the ice has reached unprecedented levels. Central heating systems in homes and buildings, fueled by coal, oil, natural gas, and electricity, have largely decoupled indoor temperatures from outdoor extremes, making life comfortable even in polar vortexes. This is underpinned by vastly improved insulation materials, fiberglass, foam, cellulose, and double-pane windows, which dramatically reduce heat loss. Modern clothing has undergone a revolution driven by synthetic materials. Fabrics like polyester fleece, Thinsulate, and Gore-Tex offer lightweight, highly insulating, and waterproof protection far superior to traditional materials. Layering systems are meticulously designed, with moisture-wicking base layers, insulating mid-layers, and waterproof/windproof outer shells, allowing for optimal thermal regulation in any cold environment. Specialized gear like heated gloves, boots, and even personal heating devices have made extreme cold far more tolerable. Transportation in winter has been transformed by powerful machinery. Snowplows clear roads with astonishing efficiency, keeping cities connected even after massive blizzards. Icebreakers carve paths through frozen seas, maintaining crucial shipping lanes. Specialized vehicles like snowmobiles and track vehicles, e.g. snowcats, enable off-road travel and rescue operations in deep snow. Aviation and satellite navigation systems further ensure year-round connectivity and rapid response capabilities. Predictive meteorology and advanced communication systems, radio, television, internet, satellite phones, have added another layer of defense. Accurate long-range weather forecasting allows communities to prepare for incoming storms, enact early warning systems, and deploy emergency services. Isolation, a silent killer in historical winters, is significantly mitigated by constant communication. Emergency services, equipped with specialized vehicles and trained personnel, can reach stranded individuals or communities even in the harshest conditions. Despite these incredible advancements, winter still demands respect. Modern infrastructure can still buckle under extreme cold, as seen with power grid failures during recent polar vortexes. And while technology allows us to survive and even thrive in conditions that would have instantly killed our ancestors, the core principles remain the same: insulation, fuel, food, and the relentless drive to innovate. From banking embers in a mud hut to building insulated skyscrapers, from wrapping in rawhides to donning high-tech synthetic parkas, humanity's journey against the ice is a continuous story of adaptation. We've gone from merely surviving the brutal chill to actively reshaping our environment and our capabilities to live comfortably within it. But as we'll see next, even with all our technological prowess, nature always has a way of reminding us who truly holds the power when the temperatures plummet. All right, we've journeyed through the icy grip of history, from primordial chill that shaped our ancestors to the Little Ice Age that redefined continents, and even the brutal winter campaigns that crippled armies. We've seen how human ingenuity has battled the frost, evolving from raw hides and banked embers to insulated homes and heated roads. You might think, with all our technology, all our science, that the modern world has finally tamed winter. We have satellite forecasts, heated seats, and 24-hour snow removal. Surely, a brutal winter is a thing of the past, right? Not quite. Tonight, we're plunging into modern winter extremes. Polar vortexes, blizzards, and unexpected freezes. Because despite all our advancements, all our clever solutions, winter still finds ways to remind us who's really in charge. And in our interconnected, hyper-reliant world, a truly brutal winter can, perhaps paradoxically, be even more devastating than it was for our ancestors. For them, it was a fight for survival against nature's raw power. For us, it's that plus a fight against collapsing infrastructure, grid failures, and supply chain breakdowns in systems we've come to depend on entirely. Let's start with a term that's become all too familiar in recent years: the polar vortex. It sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie, a frozen alien invasion, but it's a very real, very terrifying meteorological phenomenon. Normally, the polar vortex is a stable, low-pressure system of extremely cold air that swirls around the north and south poles, contained by a strong jet stream. Think of it like a giant, frigid top spinning neatly at the top of the world. But sometimes, thanks to complex atmospheric conditions, that top starts to wobble. When the jet stream, which normally acts like a fast-moving atmospheric river, gets disrupted or weakened, it can allow lobes of that super cold polar air to break off and plunge southward, deep into populated areas not accustomed to such extremes. We're talking about temperatures that don't just dip below freezing, but plummet to -20, -30, or even -40 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's before factoring in the wind chill. Exposed skin can suffer frostbite in minutes. Water pipes, especially in regions not accustomed to sustained sub-zero temperatures, burst en masse, causing millions in property damage and cutting off access to clean water. For populations relying on heated homes and warm workplaces, these sudden, extreme cold snaps are a shock to the system. Transportation grinds to a halt as roads ice over, and air travel becomes impossible. Schools close, businesses shut down, and entire cities can feel like they're frozen in time, utterly paralyzed. We saw this vividly in January 2019, when a piece of the polar vortex broke off and sent temperatures in the U.S. Midwest plunging to levels colder than Antarctica. Chicago saw lows of -23 degrees Fahrenheit, with wind chills hitting -50 degrees Fahrenheit. The cold was so intense that railway tracks cracked, exposed skin suffered frostbite in minutes, and emergency services were overwhelmed with calls for hypothermia. Even common household items like boiling water thrown in the air would instantly vaporize into a cloud of ice crystals. A fascinating visual, but a grim reminder of the extreme cold. It was a stark example of how a normally contained cold system can wreak havoc when unleashed beyond the polar vortex. We're also seeing an increase in the intensity and frequency of what I call mega blizzards or snowmageddons. These aren't just big snowfalls. They're apocalyptic events defined by their sheer volume of snow, often measured in feet, not inches, coupled with high winds that create whiteout conditions and sustained duration, often paralyzing entire regions for days. What's driving them? Atmospheric rivers, those long, narrow corridors of moisture in the sky, can dump enormous amounts of precipitation. When these combine with cold air masses, you get snow of unprecedented scale. Think of nor'easters, massive storms that barrel up the east coast of North America, or the relentless lake effect snows that pummel cities like Buffalo, New York, year after year. The immediate impact is chaos. Roads become impassable, trapping commuters, stranding emergency vehicles, and cutting off communities. Airports shut down, halting global travel and trade. The sheer weight of snow can collapse roofs, leading to structural damage and dangerous conditions inside buildings. And of course, power outages become life-threatening. When you combine feet of snow, high winds, and sub-zero temperatures, losing heat isn't just an inconvenience. It's a direct threat to life, often leading to carbon monoxide poisoning as people resort to unsafe heating methods. Remember the Snowmageddon of February 2010? A series of massive blizzards hammered the mid-Atlantic region of the U.S., dumping record amounts of snow over several days. Washington, D.C. and Baltimore were effectively shut down, with government offices, schools, and transportation networks paralyzed. Millions lost power, and the economic cost due to lost productivity and cleanup efforts was staggering. Even more recently, cities like Buffalo have faced blizzards of almost unbelievable intensity, with snow accumulation measured in multiple feet over very short periods, turning familiar neighborhoods into frozen labyrinths and testing the limits of emergency response. These events push even well-equipped cities to their breaking point, revealing fragility of our complex systems when faced with nature's overwhelming force. But perhaps the most insidious modern winter extreme is the unexpected freeze in unprepared regions. This is where our reliance on specific infrastructure becomes a critical vulnerability. Think of areas that rarely experience prolonged deep freezes, the American South, parts of Australia, or even regions of Europe that aren't typically accustomed to Arctic blasts. When extreme cold descends on these places, the consequences are often catastrophic because their infrastructure simply isn't built for it. The prime example, and one of the most chilling modern case studies, is the February 2021 winter storm Uri in Texas. Texas, known for its heat and oil, found itself in the grip of an unprecedented deep freeze. Temperatures plummeted below freezing and stayed there for days, reaching single digits in some areas. The results were devastating. Asterisk power grid failure asterisk, the state's largely independent power grid, not winterized for such conditions, buckled. Natural gas lines froze, power plants went offline, and millions were left without electricity or heat for days in sub-zero temperatures. Asterisk water crisis asterisk, with no power, water treatment plants failed, and pipes burst across the state, contaminating water supplies and leaving millions without clean drinking water. Hospitals lost water, impacting critical care. Asterisk humanitarian crisis asterisk, people resorted to desperate measures for warmth and water. Carbon monoxide poisoning from indoor grills and car exhaust became rampant. Hypothermia cases surged. Food supplies dwindled as roads became impassable. Asterisk agricultural devastation asterisk, the state's agricultural industry, particularly citrus and livestock, suffered immense losses, impacting farmers and the broader economy for years. The Texas freeze highlighted how modern societies, despite their technological prowess, remain incredibly vulnerable to extreme weather when systems are designed for average conditions, not extremes. The brutal reality was not just the cold itself, but the cascading failures of interdependent systems, energy, water, transportation, communication, designed for a different climate reality. This wasn't just a weather event. It was a systemic collapse, turning a severe cold snap into a humanitarian crisis. The interconnected consequences of these modern winter extremes echo many of the silent killers we discuss from history, but with a new, technological twist. Asterisk resource depletion and supply chain shocks asterisk, while we have global supply chains. Sudden mega blizzards or unexpected freezes can cripple regional distribution, leading to empty grocery store shelves, fuel shortages, and medical supply delays. The disruption is often swift and widespread. Asterisk public health crises, modern-style asterisk beyond hypothermia and frostbite, modern cold-related health issues include carbon monoxide poisoning from improper indoor heating, increased risk of heart attacks from shoveling heavy snow, and a surge in respiratory illnesses as people huddle indoors. Hospitals can be overwhelmed not just by the sick, but by the loss of power or water. Asterisk economic paralysis. Digitally amplified asterisk modern economies are built on just-in-time delivery and constant connectivity. When extreme winter weather hits, everything stops. Lost work days, disrupted trade, crippled transportation. The economic impact is measured in billions, far beyond what ancient societies experienced, because the scale of our economic activity is so much greater. Asterisk isolation, despite connectivity asterisk, even with smartphones and the internet, power outages can quickly sever modern communities from the outside world. Communication networks fail. Heating systems rely on electricity, and once again, entire neighborhoods can become isolated islands, just like in ancient times, but with a different set of vulnerabilities. Asterisk psychological toll, asterisk the constant threat, the loss of basic services, the prolonged darkness, and the sheer discomfort take a heavy toll. Seasonal affective disorder is a known modern affliction, but prolonged, brutal winter extremes add layers of anxiety, helplessness, and even trauma, especially when basic survival is challenged in an era of expected comfort. In essence, modern winter extremes serve as a humbling reminder. While we build incredible civilizations, we are still fundamentally at the mercy of nature's raw power. Our ingenuity has granted us comfort and control, but it has also woven a complex web of dependencies. When winter decides to show its brutal hand today, it doesn't just bring ice and snow. It brings a potential for our sophisticated systems to unravel, exposing vulnerabilities that are as ancient as humanity itself, yet uniquely amplified by our 21st century reliance. And as we look to the future, there's a paradox brewing. We've talked about the brutal winter as a direct force of nature, but what happens when human activity itself starts to fundamentally reshape the very nature of winter? We're about to explore the chilling irony of how global warming might just be making our future winters even more extreme. All right, we've shivered through history's most brutal winters here on Earth. We've seen how relentless cold reshaped ancient civilizations, crippled armies, and brought entire societies to their knees through famine and disease. We've explored the incredible ingenuity humanity developed just to survive temperatures that feel utterly impossible to us today. But here's the thing. Everything we've talked about so far, it's basically a balmy summer day compared to the real cold out there. Tonight, we're leaving Earth's frosty embrace behind. We're going to plunge into the unimaginable, terrifying depths of the universe's coldest frontiers, where temperatures drop to numbers that defy comprehension, where matter behaves in bizarre ways, and where silence reigns supreme. Prepare yourselves, because this is where the true definition of brutal cold begins. First, let's talk about the ultimate cold, absolute zero. On Earth, we measure temperature using Fahrenheit or Celsius. But in space, especially when we talk about extreme cold, scientists use the Kelvin scale. Why Kelvin? Because on the Kelvin scale, zero isn't just a really low number. It's a theoretical point where all molecular motion stops. No heat, no vibration, no energy whatsoever. It's the coldest anything can possibly get. That's 0 Kelvin, which translates to approximately minus 273.15 degrees Celsius, or minus 459.67 degrees Fahrenheit. Think about that for a second. Every single atom, every molecule, completely still. It's a state of perfect, terrifying calm. While it's practically impossible to reach absolute zero in any real-world scenario, even in a lab, we can only get incredibly close. It serves as our cosmic benchmark for extreme cold. So, where do we find these frigid temperatures in the universe? Let's start with the most obvious place, the vast emptiness of space itself. It might seem paradoxical. We see fiery stars, exploding supernovae, and blazing galaxies, yet the space between them is incredibly cold. Why? Because space is mostly a vacuum. On Earth, temperature is largely about how quickly air molecules are vibrating and bumping into each other. If you have hot air, those molecules are zipping around. If you have cold air, they're moving slower. But in the vacuum of space, there are very few molecules. No air to hold heat, no air to transfer it. Objects in space, if they're not near a star, radiate their heat away into the void. This means that if you were just floating in the vacuum of deep space, away from any heat source, your body would slowly, inexorably radiate all its heat away, cooling to near absolute zero. You wouldn't freeze instantly like in sci-fi movies, but the process would be relentless and utterly fatal. Venture out into the interstellar medium, the space between stars within a galaxy, and the chill really sets in. Here, the average temperature hovers around a few Kelvin, just a few degrees above absolute zero. Imagine an environment where a simple cold snap on Earth would feel like a supernova. The matter here is incredibly diffuse, meaning there are only a few atoms per cubic centimeter. For comparison, the air you're breathing has something like 10 to the power of 19. That's a 1 followed by 19 zeros, molecules per cubic centimeter. This extreme sparseness means there's virtually nothing to absorb or hold heat. It's a cold so profound that even light takes eons to traverse it, and any warmth from distant stars is spread so thin it's barely perceptible. Now, let's talk about planets and moons without substantial atmospheres. We tend to think of worlds as having a single temperature, but for airless bodies, it's a tale of extreme highs and brutal lows. Take our own moon. Its surface can swing from a scorching 120 degrees Celsius, 250 degrees Fahrenheit in direct sunlight, to a bone-chilling minus 173 degrees Celsius, minus 280 degrees Fahrenheit in shadow. Why such extremes? Because there's no atmosphere to trap and distribute heat. The side facing the sun cooks. The side facing away freezes. The same applies to distant dwarf planets like Pluto. Far from the sun, Pluto receives very little solar radiation. Its average surface temperature is a frigid minus 229 degrees Celsius, minus 380 degrees Fahrenheit. It has a thin, tenuous atmosphere, but it's nowhere near enough to act as a thermal blanket. So when the sun dips below its horizon, the cold becomes utterly absolute. Imagine a world where liquid nitrogen would boil. That's Pluto. Moving further out, the giant gas planets of our own solar system are incredibly cold in their upper atmospheres. Jupiter's cloud tops average about minus 145 degrees Celsius, minus 234 degrees Fahrenheit. Saturn is even colder at minus 178 degrees Celsius, minus 288 degrees Fahrenheit. And by the time you reach Uranus and Neptune, the ice giants, you're looking at cloud top temperatures plummeting to around minus 218 degrees Celsius, minus 360 degrees Fahrenheit for Uranus, and minus 201 degrees Celsius, minus 330 degrees Fahrenheit for Neptune. These giants are so far from the sun that they receive only a tiny fraction of its heat. While their interiors are hot, churning with immense pressure and energy, their outer layers are constantly radiating heat away into the vast coldness of space, making them giant, beautiful, terrifyingly cold spheres. Beyond planets, we have brown dwarfs, sometimes called failed stars. These celestial objects are larger than planets, but not massive enough to ignite stable nuclear fusion in their cores like true stars. They glow faintly, mostly in infrared, as they slowly cool down. Over billions of years, a brown dwarf can become incredibly cold. Some have observed surface temperatures as low as 100 Kelvin, minus 173 degrees Celsius, or minus 280 degrees Fahrenheit, which is warmer than absolute zero, but still unimaginably cold for something that tried to be a star. They are like cosmic embers, slowly fading into the darkness, radiating less and less heat with each passing eon. The coldest regions in space aren't always the emptiest. Sometimes they're places where new stars are born, nebulae and molecular clouds. These are vast interstellar clouds of gas and dust, so cold and dense that atoms can bond together to form molecules. Their temperatures can drop to around 10 to 20 Kelvin, minus 263 degrees Celsius, to minus 253 degrees Celsius, or minus 442 degrees Fahrenheit, to minus 423 degrees Fahrenheit. This extreme cold is crucial because it slows down the motion of atoms and molecules, allowing gravity to pull them together and eventually form new stars and planetary systems. It's a paradox. The cold serves as a nursery for the hot, One of the most famous examples is the Pillars of Creation in the Eagle Nebula, where cold gas and dust coalesce into dense pockets that will eventually collapse under their own gravity to form new stars. These beautiful cosmic structures are literally freezing cold. Even the remnants of dead stars can become incredibly cold. After a star like our sun exhausts its fuel, it sheds its outer layers and its core collapses into a white dwarf. These dense objects no longer undergo fusion, so they slowly cool down over billions and even trillions of years. Eventually, they become black dwarfs. Theoretical, completely cold, dark objects that no longer emit any significant heat or light. We haven't observed any yet because the universe isn't old enough for the first white dwarfs to have cooled down completely. More massive stars after supernova can leave behind neutron stars or even black holes. While these objects are incredibly dense and often associated with extreme energy, they eventually cool down significantly as well, becoming essentially cosmic gravestones that emit no heat of their own. But what about the absolute coldest known natural place in the universe? That title belongs to the Boomerang Nebula. Located about 5,000 light-years away in the constellation Centaurus, this protoplanetary nebula holds the record as the coldest natural place discovered so far. Its temperature is measured at just 1 Kelvin, a mere 1 degree above absolute zero. How does it get so incredibly cold? It's all about rapid expansion. The Boomerang Nebula is a dying star that is ejecting gas at an incredible speed, about 164 kilometers per second, 100 miles per second. This rapid expansion causes the gas to cool dramatically, similar to how a refrigerator works or how opening a can of compressed air makes the can feel cold. This process, called adiabatic expansion, chills the gas to a temperature even lower than the background cosmic microwave radiation, making it an extraordinary outlier in the vast coldness of space. Speaking of the background cosmic radiation, let's talk about the cosmic microwave background, CMB. This is the faint glow of radiation left over from the Big Bang, the universe's earliest moments. It permeates all of space and is essentially the fundamental background temperature of the entire universe. Its temperature is about 2.7 Kelvin, minus 270.45 degrees Celsius, or minus 454.81 degrees Fahrenheit. This omnipresent chill is a relic from a time when the universe was incredibly hot and dense, but as it expanded over billions of years, this radiation stretched and cooled to its current frigid temperature. Everywhere you look, even where there's nothing else, there's this uniform, deep, cold hum. It's the universe's ultimate ambient temperature, only disturbed by local heat sources like stars and galaxies. And finally, let's consider the ultimate cosmic winter, the future of the universe itself. According to the prevailing cosmological model, the universe is constantly expanding, and this expansion is accelerating. If this continues, the universe will eventually reach a state known as heat death. In this scenario, all stars will eventually burn out, black holes will evaporate, and all matter will decay. The universe will become an infinitely vast, infinitely dilute, and uniformly cold expanse, where every particle is so far from every other particle that there is no energy transfer, no light, no motion. Everything will eventually reach a uniform temperature infinitesimally close to absolute zero. This is the ultimate, silent, and endless winter. So, when we look up at the night sky, we see glittering stars, vibrant nebulae, and distant galaxies. But remember that behind all that cosmic spectacle lies a cold so profound, so absolute, that it makes Earth's most brutal winters feel like a warm hug. It's a humbling reminder of the sheer scale of the universe, a place where cold isn't just a condition, but a fundamental force shaping everything from the birth of stars to the ultimate fate of all existence. Our struggle against Earth's frost is a testament to our resilience, but the universe's chill is a reminder of our cosmic insignificance in the face of truly unimaginable extremes. Alright, you've heard the chilling tales. From the deep primal freezes of the ice ages that shaped our very evolution, to the relentless grip of the little ice age that starved populations and reshaped empires. We've seen how ancient civilizations battled frost, how armies crumbled under winter's scythe, and how our ingenuity has, for millennia, been sharpened by the cold. But what if I told you that, for all our triumphs over historical winters, we're now facing a paradox unlike any before? A future where global warming, the very phenomenon heating our planet, might actually deliver more brutal winters to places least equipped to handle them? It sounds utterly contradictory, doesn't it? Global warming implies things get hotter, averages rise, ice melts. So, how in the world could that lead to more extreme cold? This isn't just a scientific curiosity. It's a terrifying twist in humanity's long struggle against the elements, and it's already happening. First, let's be clear. When scientists talk about global warming, they're talking about the average temperature of the Earth's surface increasing over time due to the buildup of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. This is undeniably happening. Average global temperatures are rising, glaciers are melting, sea levels are increasing. The planet, overall, is warming. But here's the critical, often misunderstood catch. Averages don't tell the whole story. A rising average doesn't mean every single place on Earth gets uniformly warmer, or that extreme cold simply vanishes. Instead, it means the patterns of weather are shifting, becoming more volatile, less predictable, and in some cases, delivering localized extremes that feel utterly alien. We're moving from global warming to global weirding. So, how does a warmer world unleash brutal cold? It starts in the Arctic. The first major player in this paradox is the polar vortex. You've probably heard this term thrown around in news reports, usually when some part of the US or Europe is shivering under record-breaking cold. But what is it really? The polar vortex is a normal, naturally occurring phenomenon. A huge, swirling mass of extremely cold, low-pressure air that typically sits high above the Earth's poles. Think of it like a giant, super-fast merry-go-round of cold air, spinning tight and fast. When the polar vortex is strong and stable, it acts like a giant atmospheric fence, keeping the frigid Arctic air locked up north, contained within its usual boundaries. This allows mid-latitude regions, where most of us live, to experience more moderate, predictable winters. But here's where global warming comes in. The Arctic is warming at a rate 2 to 3 times faster than the rest of the planet, a phenomenon known as Arctic amplification. As sea ice melts, exposing darker ocean water, and as snow cover retreats, more solar radiation is absorbed, further warming the region. This rapid Arctic warming is reducing the temperature difference between the Arctic and the mid-latitudes. And that temperature difference is what fuels the jet stream and keeps the polar vortex strong. Imagine that atmospheric fence. It's held taut by the big temperature contrast between the super cold pole and the relatively warmer mid-latitudes. Reduce that contrast, and the fence goes slack. The polar vortex gets wobbly, stretched, elongated, or even splits into multiple pieces. When this happens, that normally contained, super-frigid Arctic air doesn't stay put. It spills or lurches southward, bringing extreme cold, blizzards, and unexpected freezes to regions that are typically much milder. We saw this famously in February 2021, when a disrupted polar vortex sent temperatures plummeting across the central and southern United States, leading to catastrophic power grid failures in Texas and other states unaccustomed to such prolonged sub-zero conditions. It was a brutal winter event, directly linked to a warming Arctic. Next, consider the jet stream, closely related to the polar vortex. The jet stream is a fast-flowing, narrow current of air high in the atmosphere, acting as a primary driver of weather patterns across the mid-latitudes. Traditionally, a strong temperature gradient between the warm tropics and the cold poles makes the jet stream flow fast and relatively straight, like a tightly stretched rubber band. This straight, fast flow creates predictable weather. Storms move through quickly, and seasonal patterns are generally stable. However, as the Arctic warms disproportionately, that temperature gradient weakens. The rubber band goes slack, and the jet stream becomes wavier, slower, and can even get stuck in a particular pattern for extended periods. Picture a lazy river instead of a strong current. These larger, slower, Rossby waves in the jet stream can cause extreme weather events to persist longer than usual. For example, if a cold trough, the southward dip in a wavy jet stream, gets stuck over a region, that area can experience prolonged, intense cold. Conversely, if a warm ridge gets stuck, it leads to persistent heat waves or droughts. This blocking phenomenon means that while some areas are experiencing record cold and snow, others, perhaps just a few hundred miles away, could be enduring unseasonably warm temperatures or even drought. It's not just warming. It's increased persistence of extreme conditions. Then there's the factor of increased atmospheric moisture. This one is a bit more straightforward. A warmer atmosphere can hold more water vapor. For every 1 degree Celsius, 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit of warming, the atmosphere can hold about 7% more moisture. What does this mean for winter? Even if the overall number of cold days decreases, when conditions are cold enough for precipitation to fall as snow or freezing rain, there's simply more water available to fall. So you might get fewer snowfalls, but when it does snow, it could be a snowmageddon event, a massive blizzard dumping record amounts of snow. The same applies to ice storms. If temperatures hover around freezing and there's ample moisture, you get devastating ice accumulation, coating everything in a treacherous, heavy layer. These aren't just inconvenient. They collapse infrastructure, bring down power lines, and isolate communities, ticking off several boxes on our brutal winter definition. Finally, we're seeing shifting storm tracks and unpredictability. As global ocean temperatures rise and atmospheric circulation patterns change, the traditional paths that winter storms take can also shift. Regions that historically experience milder, wetter winters might suddenly find themselves in the crosshairs of intense blizzards, or conversely, areas accustomed to heavy snow might see less. This unpredictability is a massive challenge for human societies. Our infrastructure, agriculture, emergency services, and even our cultural preparedness are built around historical norms. An unexpected freeze in a warmer climate can cause far more damage and disruption than a similar cold snap in a region that's used to it. Think of citrus groves in Florida or olive trees in Greece suddenly hit by sustained freezing temperatures. They simply aren't resilient to such events, leading to massive economic losses and food supply disruptions. The implications of this paradox for human societies are profound. Asterisk infrastructure stress asterisk many of our power grids, water pipes, roads, and transportation systems are designed for a historical range of temperatures and precipitation. They are not built to withstand rapid, sustained plunges to temperatures far below their design limits, nor are they prepared for the sudden, massive snowfalls or ice storms that a warmer, wetter atmosphere can deliver. The Texas power grid collapse in 2021, where millions lost power and dozens died, is a stark reminder of this vulnerability. Asterisk agricultural disruption asterisk farming relies on predictable seasons. Unseasonal frosts, due to a wobbly jet stream, can destroy budding crops in spring or tender plants in autumn. Shifts in precipitation patterns can lead to water stress or excessive moisture. This directly impacts food security and the livelihoods of millions. Asterisk resource management volatility asterisk energy demands become more erratic. Extreme cold snaps require massive increases in heating fuel, while hotter summers demand more cooling, putting immense strain on energy supplies and infrastructure. This can lead to price spikes and shortages. Asterisk economic impact asterisk the cost of these extreme winter events is enormous. Billions in damages from burst pipes, collapsed roofs, transportation shutdowns, and agricultural losses. Insurance costs rise, and recovery can be slow and expensive, especially for vulnerable communities. Asterisk psychological toll asterisk the constant unpredictability of weather. The whiplash effect from mild periods to sudden brutal extremes can take a heavy toll on mental health. There's a constant anxiety about what the next season, or even the next week, might bring. This uncertainty erodes morale and a sense of stability. Asterisk the paradox of preparedness asterisk. How do you prepare for something that is, by its very nature, unpredictable and outside historical norms? Investing in infrastructure for extreme cold in a typically warm region might seem wasteful in milder years, yet catastrophic if the weird winter arrives. It requires a fundamental shift in how societies think about climate risk. It's crucial to distinguish between a single cold snap and climate change. A cold day is just weather, but an increase in the frequency and intensity of these extreme cold snaps, especially in new places, tied to clear atmospheric mechanisms like a disrupted polar vortex and a wavier jet stream, is a sign of climate change. It's like a baseball player who, after changing their technique, starts hitting fewer ground balls but more home runs and also strikes out more. Their average might still be their average, but the type of game they play has fundamentally changed. So, what does the future winter look like in a warming world? Overall, we will likely see fewer days below freezing globally and a general shortening of the cold season. But paradoxically, for many regions, the winters we do experience will be more volatile, characterized by sudden, extreme swings between mild and intensely cold temperatures, punctuated by massive precipitation events. Winter will be less reliable, more disruptive, and in many localized instances, far more brutal than what historical averages might suggest. Our ancestors adapted to the great ice ages by discovering fire and crafting furs. They built granaries and fortified villages to endure the little ice age. Their ingenuity was forged in the face of predictable, if harsh, patterns. But the challenge of climate change is different. It's the unpredictability of it all. We understand the science, we see the mechanisms, and we are starting to feel the impacts. The question now is, can humanity, with all its modern technological prowess and scientific understanding, adapt to a future where winter doesn't just bite, but strikes from unexpected angles with unprecedented force, in a world that's supposed to be getting warmer? The stakes, much like the changing climate itself, are higher than ever before.